Okay. Ready?
All right. This is the Board Executive Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District on Friday, January 14, 2022. It's 1:31 in the afternoon, and the meeting will now come to order, and I'd ask the recording secretary, Becky Fang, to take the roll call.
Okay, this is Becky Fang, recording secretary, taking roll. President Coffey.
Present.
Director Rosario.
Here.
Director Lane.
Here.
Okay. Park District staff participating in this meeting include GM Landreth, AGM Kelchner, AGM Johnson, AGM O'Connor, Chief Chiraburo, Brian Holt, Dave Mason. Today's board executive meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. Board members and staff may participate via phone and video conference. We are providing live audio and video streaming. For those members of the public not attending in person, which we're not doing today, public comments may be submitted live via Zoom, via email, or via voicemail as noted on the agenda. If there are no questions about the meeting, we will proceed.
Okay, so we'll go straight to our topic for the afternoon. Item 2, Trail Use Education and Community Engagement Plan Update. Carol, I guess that's over to you.
Thank you, President Coffey, and good afternoon to our other directors and my colleagues on this call. I want to say that today's discussion is about trail user education and our community engagement program that we have been working on for since 2021. The Public Affairs Department has taken a lead role in addition to colleagues representing operations, planning, stewardship, and public safety. We've been meeting for quite a while to discuss some of the issues having to do with trail user visitation and some of the challenges that we've had with the increased visitation with respect to COVID, adding more people to our trails and our parks. And I'm happy here today to acknowledge that my partner, Dave Mason, who is our public information supervisor, is going to be walking you through a presentation to show the planning, what we have done in terms of research and opportunities to discuss some of our strategies with the public prior to actually implementing anything in the parks, and what we are going to suggest to you today that we do implement in the parks. I am happy to see some of my colleagues, again, representing operations, stewardship, public safety, and planning here. And when it gets time to having questions, I hope that they will jump in as needed to address any issues having to do with trail conflicts or user challenges. So with that, I'm going to ask Dave Mason to start today's presentation. Thank you.
Great, I'm going to bring up the screen here to share. And I imagine everybody can see the presentation.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So let me get going here and just kind of talk. Carol mentioned a little bit first about the overarching kind of when this began and what the kind of effort came together. But I'll walk through a little bit more details of, if I can get this to move forward. Oops, there. Let's go back. Okay. So obviously developed last year or began last year, but really kind of response to a lot of internal dialogue, for years, board dialogue, public dialogue, staff dialogue about the need for something about trail use, especially geared towards conflicts. But obviously we know there's plenty of needs in terms of educating the public related to trails. So a lot of internal feedback. Also, obviously the Trail User Working Group. I know Brian's on the Zoom as well. And of course, district stakeholders, through that group or outside of that group, obviously have talked and even brought up, a need for something like what we're going to talk about today. But also, obviously, is increased visitation, which has taken place recently. Well, just regardless of COVID, was increasing over time naturally. But obviously, we'll get into COVID and how that really, amped up the need for something like this. But just talk about kind of that process of how we work together to come to where we are today. We did bring on board a Circle Point, which is a public sector communication consulting firm. They do a lot of work with government agencies. They actually have an office here in Oakland. It's one of their 3 offices. And they do everything working with Caltrans on big transportation projects to working on smaller ones that are social media oriented. So they're pretty well known actually out there in the public sector, public information world. And so brought them in to help us out in guiding the development of this program and some of the internal discussions we had to have, and also some of the testing we needed to do to make sure our approach, made sense. And that'll be kind of seen throughout here, is that it wasn't just about having their expertise, but they also helped us in gathering, what we were thinking and making sure that it made sense through testing. So obviously, I mentioned real quickly, but I'll go into more detail just here, is that obviously, in addition to all the needs for this, when COVID took place, obviously we had a big influx of new users across the board. Also in the biking community, one of the ones that we hear a lot of conflicts from them or about them. But either way, they're one of our large user groups or active user groups. And we did an influx of people who just didn't know what the rules were. They were new to using the parks by age, or just in terms of being more likely to get out because it was something to do when there was shelter in place and other limitations. And obviously with that comes potential conflicts. And, sometimes new users to the parks don't know the rules or the unwritten rules, and they're more likely to engage in kind of unsafe behaviors out there that can lead to issues for themselves and obviously operations and public safety that obviously are in place to help all visitors in the parks. So as we were kind of developing the program with Circle Point, a team was developed internally to work and help with this. That involved Brian, Sean, folks from stewardship with Matt, public safety and operations, in addition to Circle Point and public affairs. And so that team kind of came together on a monthly basis to talk about the development of this program, the needs, the opportunities, any immediate things that we needed to do while we were developing this plan, because we knew it would take a little while to develop an overarching plan for implementation. So there was that team in place. But through all the dialogue and all of our meetings, we kind of had some goals that came into place with this. And that was promoting a culture really and a respect out among visitors. The different types of folks and different uses are taking place on the trails. And that was kind of a value and goal at the same time. Obviously, an overarching goal is that obviously we want to improve the safety and reduce the conflicts on the trails. That was the real thing we're going for, obviously, is to try to improve behavior out on the trails to thereby improve everyone's experience and safety on the trails. And also through our dialogue, we came to kind of identify some target audiences that we knew we had to go to. And also things became apparent that we probably would have to do sub messages or targeted messages to folks by user group. But here you can see, obviously we know hikers, walkers, runners, and we just kind of put in dog walkers in there, obviously, because they're kind of like that, but they're broken out here. That's one group, bicyclists and equestrians. Those are kind of the large ones. And we obviously have some target audiences, communities for ADA, and obviously folks that are environmentalists or nature viewers, or, go out to really enjoy the wildlife and the nature in the parks. And so those are kind of our target audiences that were identified as part of this process. So one of the first steps was to develop kind of what are we going to do in terms of messaging. And working with Circle Point and the team, it became clear that we needed to have some kind of overarching theme that resonated with trail users, kind of no matter what their purpose for their visit was, no matter what their use was, but that it could also be used, obviously, in breaking down specific messages to those target audiences. So we didn't want to have like one overarching theme and have all these themes for different users. We want to have one overarching theme, and then underneath that theme, we can go and communicate and educate certain user groups in the community. And that's kind of what the second bullet kind of talks about, is tailorizing the messages underneath that overarching theme. So what was kind of first developed were some concepts. So we knew we had to test these and think about these for a while. So some concepts were developed by Circle Point in discussion with the team. And there are kind of three categories here. One was just a pure informational one called Trail Use 101. And that's just a basic, getting the information out about the trails to folks. We had a values oriented type one that talked about the value that trails are out there for everyone to use. And then number three really is more kind of on that all use, but really just more about highlighting the different types of users and the idea of working and together and sharing the trails. And those are the concepts were further moved into a testing phase with Circle Point as the lead and a lot of other folks helping out. But basically the testing of those messages and themes broke out into in-field testing at parks. Circle Point itself went out to one of the locations, Briones, with visuals in line with those concepts, and really saw, from folks what their thoughts were, what the feedback was from folks. And we also did online digital testing of these on Facebook to see which ones resonated in terms of folks, clicking or liking or just getting their eyeballs on it to see what was the most effective in terms of grabbing folks' attention. And so we did the message testing in the field, we did the online testing, and we also had our ambassadors go out to some sites and did some testing as well with these posters and got some feedback for us as well to make sure that it was consistent with what Circle Point got and what we were seeing digitally. All right, so key takeaways that Circle Point kind of came up with based on discussions with people out there, visitors in the parks, was the idea of limited text. Even though, there's a lot of information to get out to them on this, they wanted limited text, really had a strong preference for that. Just because folks are out, there's a lot of signs, a lot of information at them, it's usually pretty clear and they just want to have something quickly to see and aren't going to stop and read a long, poster with a lot of fine print. It's really when they go to the parks, they want to just experience the parks. I mean, we kind of know that. They also got feedback to us that they want really high quality photos, and not just high quality photos, but photos that represented themselves in the use that they're doing. And so we kind of gathered from that is we had some good pictures in those posters that were used, but the idea was that if you're going out to talk to the biking community with a message, you want to have the biking a picture highlighted, right? Because they really identify with the picture of themselves in the sign. And that was the feedback we got. Yep, okay. And you can see like the feedback itself on the theme really was be a good trail neighbor and trails are for everyone. We're kind of definitely the ones that popped out a little bit based on that feedback. Because the Trail Use 101 basic information had a lot of text and didn't have any photos. So naturally folks kind of first went to those other two with more little text and more photos. Here's some results of the digital testing, and which really showed also that the trails are for everyone was really the most popular and most one that resonated with folks. That was both with our consultant Circle Point said about being out in the field is that, at the end of the day, people liked trails are for everyone the most. And so that's also what showed up when we did some of our testing on Facebook. It's the one that got, the most response, most eyeballs on it on social media. All right, kind of to talk about some other items that were going on at the same time as our program to develop this plan was that there were identified some immediate needs that we could work on while we were developing this plan with Circle Point, and that the group and the team worked on. There was two things. One was a bike avail kiosk program, and so this is going on right now. These kiosks have been delivered to the two parks, Alhambra Creek staging area and Crockett staging area. And so they're in the process of being put up. And the idea here obviously is to, improve and have bells available for the bikers on the trails. It was funded by REI via the Regional Trails Foundation. And actually in partnership, Bicycle Trails Council of East Bay is going to be monitoring and maintaining the bell supplies through a partnership there and through volunteer efforts. And we can talk about this a little at the end if you have questions. I'm not sure if Sean's on, but I'm sure Brian can touch on this as well. The other immediate action we know we needed to do while we were talking about this is that we need to start doing some surveying in the field, not just of folks' perceptions, online or whatnot, but actually get sense from folks on the trails that they're walking off the trails, what's called a trail intercept survey. So it's about talking to folks as they actually walked off the trails from their experience to see what their perceptions were about safety, about conflicts, things of that nature. To see, we know we get a lot of feedback about this is going on, that's going on, but really, as folks are walking off the trails, what's the real information that we're getting? And we have this taking place so far at 2 locations, Briones. We had some great ambassadors there help us out in doing those surveys. That was Colin and Amila were those folks there. And so I'm sure you can provide a lot of feedback based on that. But basically, in looking at the numbers, there was about 50 surveys done there on, I think, a pretty popular, busy day, relatively speaking. And people obviously love the parks. Not a lot of trail conflicts overall. So overall, a lot of folks were like, oh yeah, no conflict, had a great time. But there were some, and so 15 conflicts. And of those top conflicts, over half of them involved bikes in some way. Either not sharing the trail, either speeding, or the other one on our list you can see on the right is not calling out when they're passing. And so that was kind of the data from that point, is that, some of this is kind of things we would expect, but this is data from folks actually walking off the trails. And we get a lot of other information, in the notes that are helpful as well. But so far, just started this process to make sure that everything we were doing was going to be on the right path. Inspiration point, very similar. Some more intercept surveys done, a lot more bikers. That was done on it's a very busy park, and it was a busy Saturday. So a lot of folks were there. And they reported more conflicts, probably because there's more people, and challenges / conflicts. Sometimes there were just trail conditions were a challenge, but either way, we have about 33, and over half of those, a little over half, were involving bikes there as well. Okay, so all this information from Circle Point, from testing the messages, from the team working together through almost over the course of an entire year, the internal team basically came down to, what is the plan for this? What are we going to do? Circle Point helped put together this final plan, and the idea was it's going to be based on Trails Are for Everyone concept. So that would be the overarching theme on signs, on social media, other avenues of communication. And then also came through all this research and all this work was that we needed to really have multiple signs and have information targeted to the specific user groups, especially, bikes, hikers, equestrians. So we didn't want to just provide an overarching signs with lots of information. We really needed to use the overarching theme, but tailorize certain awareness or information to the user groups so that it was short, like they said, and also had, good photos that would resonate and connect with, the users. So we're going off of what we heard in terms of working with Circle Point, their field testing, and the online digital results. And the last one there is, obviously using engaging photos and the signs are a clear need as well. And what it breaks down into here is now that we have some key messages and approach for all of this, or what was suggested in terms of channels for getting the information out. And it's websites obviously are important, having information on our website. Circle Points can help us develop some brochures and flyers as part of this. Park signage, of course, is a large need, and having a suite we kind of determined is needed, a suite of park signs for operations to use depending on what's needed on a certain trail or a certain staging area. So if we'll have a bike sign, we'll have a hiker sign, an equestrian sign for under the overarching Trails Are for Everyone theme, and that'll be kind of available for operations to use depending on what they know best, what obviously is going on the trails and at the staging areas. We also have social media, digital engagement. So obviously working with our All Trails folks, our Yelp folks out there to try to get more information out to those avenues. Earned media, of course, into our newspapers and other communication vehicles out there that are already existing. Obviously, our own communication vehicles. It's not even written down here, but that's obviously an automatic. At some point, doing outreach and community events, and that's where we actually can, we have a suite of information, we have the brochures, going out and actually talking to folks about this information. Obviously, we know folks in the public safety are used to talking, so having this information available for them, but also just some kind of approach maybe with staff where we can kind of try to get this information out amongst community events and through outreach. And then obviously partnerships is an option here at some point, and that's partnering not just with the groups. There's a lot of hiking groups, for instance, biking groups, partnering with them or partnering with other agencies to get this information out. And then of course you have PSAs and advertising as channels as well. Obviously this is kind of done over a timeline, some are later than others and some are earlier than others, like signage, but that's the overarching kind of where we want to get this information out. And I can answer any questions. Well, first I want to acknowledge, all the folks that are on this. I can't see the screen still, but I know Brian was on earlier. I know somebody from public safety was involved and is on, and operations, of course, as well. So I want to acknowledge all the help. This was really a big team effort in terms of meeting monthly, figuring out what was the best approach. Circle Point, of course, having a consultant really helped in terms of developing the material and approach with their expertise. And here we are today about to launch this campaign, this program in the parks.
Okay, Dave, thank you. Very fine presentation. I think we should start if we pull down the slides. We might start with others from management that want to augment what Dave has presented or talk about it from their perspective, and then we'll come around to board questions. Carol?
Thank you, President Coffey. I think what Dave outlined is a program, a campaign, something that we can use for a short period of time, or we can tweak if we need to change things up. But it's certainly the first starting point in the parks of an educational plan to hopefully address how some of the conflicts that we have heard about and actually have seen in the parks on the trails, and how people can do their best to avoid them if they have all the information. What we're trying to do is to build some accountability from to the public for their own responsibility. We know that public safety does not have the bandwidth to be on every trail, nor do we expect them to be. But we do want to start with education with some obvious visuals and messaging that we think the public will appreciate and will resonate with them. And I would like to ask Jim and or Chief Chiaburo to chime in about the aspect of not only the accountability, but how their engagement with their own staffs might be involved in this program with the public.
Jim, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Coffey. I really am happy that we're moving forward with this project, and thank you, Dave and Carol. And I know there was quite a few other folks involved in the team, but we need to do something, especially around all these new visitors we have that are not tuned in to trail etiquette and proper trail behavior. So I think this is a really great step in the right direction, and it has to be kind of an ongoing, as Dave and Carol said, it's like this is an ongoing evolution of a process, but we need to do our best attempt to educate and also to reach out to some of these user groups and engage them to help police their own user group in terms of behavior, because it's only getting more crowded out there. And unless we all learn how to share the trails together and behave properly, it's not going to get any better. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I'm sure the chief is going to talk about this, but we can't enforce our way past these problems. It has to be some responsibility on the part of the public. So again, thank you. I think it's a great step in the right direction. And we just need to keep the process getting updated regularly as a part of our communication, overall communication plan. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Chief?
Well, good afternoon, Director, and I echo what Jim said, and good afternoon, everyone else on the board and colleagues. I feel that this is very important work, and I greatly appreciate the expertise that our partners are bringing to this. The survey is fantastic. It is hard for us to capture data. If we were to look at all of the incidents that happen in the park, we don't have one necessarily for trail conflict. So I'm very grateful, and I want to recognize that and point out the significance of doing a survey. I know it's time consuming and it's hard, but it really means much as when we talk about precision and trying to be accurate, just like our policing philosophy, which is we want to be highly professional, but we want to be very precise. And that also leads into the addressing what's going on in the parks. And absolutely, we're looking for park patrons that in an ideal world would follow all the rules. And ultimately for us, we would love to police our way out of business, but we know that really we need compliance. We're looking for compliance. We're looking to redirect all this energy that people have. So it's a wonderful idea to continue along with planning and coming up with ideas that where people can harmoniously enjoy the parks. That's really what we want. So I'm grateful for the partnerships we have here and the work that's been done, and we're willing to keep going in that direction. So thank you.
So let's go, unless there's anyone else. Christina, did you want to add?
Yes, Director Coffey, thank you. AGM Kelchner from Acquisition Stewardship and Development. I just wanted to again express my appreciation for this work going forward. Additional public education is certainly something that staff has been very interested in, and also something that we've heard from the Trail User Working Group consistently about having additional education and informational campaigns about how to share the trails. And I did want to just pass it over to Brian and see if he had anything quick to add from the Trail User Working Group perspective.
Well, thanks, Christina, and thanks everybody. Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails and GIS. And we appreciate working with public affairs and operations throughout the development of this. And really what it is, it's taken a lot of the input that we have heard through the Trail User Working Group and starting to implement. Part of, well, just real quick, I'll give an update sort of where that process is at. The Trail User Working Group, as the board will recall, was formed a little bit over a year ago. And really with the intent of looking at how can we work to open up new natural surface trails within our land bank properties. And a lot of that comes down to questions around trails conflict and mountain biking and hiking and some of those, and equestrians and some of those trail conflicts, both real and perceived, that occur within the parks. That process has gone on throughout the past year, and naturally you can't talk about trails in land bank properties, new trails, without also talking about what's happening in our existing parks and current trails. It's been a good, robust discussion, a lot of focus conversations with different user groups. We're just winding that down, looking to have one last meeting at the end of February. We will be coming to the PAC on January 24th with sort of a summary. And then following that, we're going to be putting together all the input that we've received and survey that we've done and information that, like what Dave has presented, into a summary document that will then come to the board. So we've really heard a number of consistent things. Part of it is, users want to have some sense of predictability on the trails. So they want to know what type of uses they might encounter on the trails. So if it is single or multi-use, having that really spelled out clearly, or if it's single use, having what uses are not permitted and what uses are permitted clearly described. Generally, people seem to be pretty open to other users, but as you know, there's kind of the elephant in the room, which is the mountain bike access on narrow natural surface trails. And that is a conversation that will continue to go on. As you know, within the park district, legally mountain bike access is very restricted on our natural surface trails. So Dave's efforts isn't in any way to change that current situation, but more to try to build in the sense of trail etiquette amongst the users, that they know where to go and where to not. So we look forward to bringing the Trail User Working Group summary back to the board. And education was a key component in there. Just making sure that people understand which trails are permitted, which trails are not, for what types of uses that are there. So this is really trying to get at that. I'm happy to answer any specific questions around what we've heard in the Trail User Working Group, but look forward to the dialogue.
All right, so let us go to committee members. Director Lane.
I wanted to ask Brian a question well, I have several things, but at the Trails Working Group, are they having conversations about what are some options, such as the idea of alternate days on narrow trails? Is that something that they're discussing, or are they doing more general discussions?
Well, overall, I would say, general discussions, but part of what we did, we did survey the Trail User Working Group on their level of comfort or acceptance of some of these, I guess what I will call alternative management strategies, like what you mentioned. So we tried to survey the Trail User Working Group members on their comfort about, would you accept alternating days, or would you support exploring single-use types of trails, or some of these other strategies that could possibly be used. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a surprise to the committee members that there are some very strong and I would say entrenched positions amongst some of the Trail User Working Group members. So I would say that a majority of the Trail User Working Group members are very supportive of exploring some of those. But then I would say there's some other members of the Trail User Working Groups, and some of those who have been very involved with the Park District for a very long period of time and have a lot of history, who kind of respond, well, it depends. What does that mean? What's that going to lead to? We need to analyze that more, or we need to discuss it more, is sort of the response that we get. I will say, we haven't got an absolute no on anything. I think folks are willing to talk about it, and folks are willing to explore things. And there's just sort of a bit of a disconnect between some of those who've been around with the Park District for a very long time, who, perhaps have some history where maybe when things were done a little bit differently, so they have some concern that, some of the skeletons from the past might come back at the Park District. And so we've been trying to work through some of that. But by and large, people seem open to exploring new things, but there remains a consistent concern about what are the impacts to resources, what are the implications for trail safety, and really what does any of the actions sort of lead to next. So sort of the concern about the camel's nose under the tent, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Then I wonder if you could, Dave, if you could put that poster up again. Trails are for everyone, and who you have on the poster is everyone. I love that picture. That's a cool picture.
Where is that?
I think it might be Pleasanton Ridge.
It's beautiful.
Certainly is. Yeah. You know, I like the overarching theme. One of my concerns is that we are really not talking about demographics. And that by that, I mean, I think we are neglecting our senior populations. There are a lot of older people who are out there, and they are often apprehensive. I have in the past on Iron Horse Trail had older people say, you know, I cannot come on the trail anymore. People are going so fast, it's usually bicycles, that I think I'm going to get bumped. And if I get bumped, I have osteoporosis and I will break something. And so I'm not using the trail anymore. So I had that from several people over the years. And then I still remember Hewlett Hornbeck, who was a equestrian, you know, as well as a hiker. And he got along in years, and he said, you know, I'm not going to be riding the horses in the park district anymore because of these fast bikers. And I'm old enough that I couldn't afford to take a fall. And I think a lot of people, you know, over 65, for example, are really aware of the consequences of an accident out there, and the consequences can be devastating. So, you know, for redistricting, we got this handy dandy page that said what percentage of our populations were older, and it is a large percentage, and it's getting larger. So I think that we need to grapple with the fact that our everyone is not necessarily a walker, a equestrian, a biker. Our everyone, we need to think about those older trail people. And I'm telling you, those are the people that give money. Those are the people that vote. And if we're going to be realistic about wanting to have this consistent support for the park district, we've got to start thinking about that group.
Thank you, Director Lane. Let me try to respond. Carol Johnson, AGM of Public Affairs. You are absolutely right. Seniors, particularly trail walking seniors, are a significant demographic for virtually all of our parks, as we understand the new demographics from the census. And this is one reason that we are working very closely with the Bicycle Trails Council. Again, to get the Bicycle Trail Council representatives and the individuals that can speak directly to their own constituency, bike riders, cyclists, mountain bikers, to communicate what we are all trying to say, which is slow down, call out. We're even providing you a bicycle bell to put on your bike so that people can hear you in advance of seeing you. So that is one of the important parts of this partnership. It's not just a visual where we're going to provide signage and put out information on social media. We're engaging directly with individual organizations that represent the constituency where we do have the challenge. And I suppose that if certain areas become trouble points or continue to be trouble spots, that is where the public safety and or operations will be assisting in some sort of an enforcement action. But that's the goal, is for us to not make this a one size fits all, but to really make sure that we're talking and having the representatives of their own constituencies trying to educate and advocate to everybody that they are affiliated with.
All right, then we'll move to Director Rosario.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Bev's question, and just looking at this poster, it really would be nice if we could include people of color in some of our communications, because people of color are in all of those user groups. So it would be nice to depict that, just to show that we're welcoming to all of our residents. That would be nice.
I would just add, Director Rosario, absolutely. We did have that on our social media ones that went out. These are kind of representations of the future. We have to update these for actual signage. So I would say, but our ones that went out as actual, we did have some nice pictures there of folks from different ethnic backgrounds.
Great. I just want to make sure that's on our radar. So thank you. And then just questions. One of another overarching theme to consider that I've seen in other agencies is the concept of keeping to the right, especially around blind turns. I know some agencies have on paved trails, they have a broken line in the center, and then a lot of people use that to remind them to stay to the right. And then if we can just be part of the message, I think that would alleviate some conflicts, but something for you guys to consider. And then also, are we still going to be using the yield signs that we have at the triangle? It's a good sign, but my only issue with them is that they're too small. They're a 15 by 15, I believe, and they're really, even at that size, they're really hard to read. And then for Chief Chuburo, do we keep track of trail conflicts as far in our RID program or incident program? Do we keep track of those as trail conflicts?
So good afternoon, Director Rosario, Chief Chuburo speaking. We do not have a specific search code for trail conflict. Those come in as a variety of incidents. So we would have to mine that data. That's why I believe that it's easier to rely on or it's actually accurate to rely on the surveys to actually talk to people. We can certainly mine data, but it's difficult. We'd have to go to all those cases. For example, we could have an accident on the Iron Horse Trail where AGM Johnson correctly said we will do enforcement as precise as we can based on complaints or observations. So we may have an accident there. So we could look at that accident and try to determine, well, how did that, what engendered that? Was that a conflict? Was it a reckless operation of a mountain bike? It's just that they're hard, number one, they're hard to track because they come in as a variety of different entities. And then the other thing, unlike a survey, again, it's always an issue dealing with what is unreported. We don't know how many of those are what is the unreported number, and that's where the survey comes in.
Yeah, I just think it's something to consider for something in the future. I mean, data speaks volumes, and I know when I was a supervisor at Redwood, I was keeping track of all the bike accidents on Westridge Trail, and I was getting like 3 a month in this one section of trail. And I had, I took that as as a sign of there was something wrong with the trail. And then we ended up looking at it with stewardship and actually doing some work on that trail, and we eliminated almost all of those accidents. So I think it's something to think about. I mean, if there's a way to separate the data out and determine if those accidents are, even if they're bikes or equestrians, whatever, pedestrian, then that might help might help the board analyze trail use in some of these areas. So something to think about.
Yes, sir, Director. We do accidents. I can tell you, I can track those. It's just the exact, in terms of the conflict. I can certainly go back and ask my staff about that in terms of our records management system and look at that. But absolutely, we do monitor accidents.
Okay.
Very similar to a DOT department would monitor traffic collisions and take all that police data to do that. But we can continue to ask. It's just particularly a trail conflict. We would have to drill down and find out what was the nature, what caused a conflict which generated a call for police service. That's how we would do that, but I will certainly ask.
Okay, and then on the report incidents directly, are we still using that?
We still have a variety of ways. People, of course, they can call us, and then we do have our program, the Park Watch program, where people can report things to us. Of course, for in progress, we always encourage them to call our communication center, call 911, or use our 7-digit number. But people can submit email requests to us that do get to us, and we do take action on those. There is good information contained in those.
And do we track those as well? Do we collect data on what's being reported?
Those would be a little difficult if we entered it into our records management system. Then we would have to identify a keyword to track that in terms of those that are coming in terms of once it transfers to us. I'm not sure. I may have to ask Carol Johnson about their AGM Johnson about mining all those requests. I don't know if we have a way to do that.
Okay.
Let me try to, if I can, address that. In answer to the question about incident reports, they come in a variety of ways, I imagine, but mostly I think they come through our website. And we have just, as you have seen, changed up our website so that it's actually easier to find a way to report an incident. Once it gets reported to the PD, I'm not quite sure how they track it, but if it comes through the website for public affairs to respond, we do track it. We do follow up with the specific park or operations administration and or public safety, whatever is necessary to ensure that we are getting the right information out to the writer or the complainant. We can provide based on what comes to us, but again, that's not going to be a full picture of all of the types of incidents that come through. I wanted to address also, but before I forget, we can work with Chief Chiaburro's division and see if there is a better way to do that in terms of collecting all the data and working it together. In terms of what you had asked for earlier, Director Rosario, about signage and whatnot, our environmental graphics team is prepared to provide a suite of types of signage, including the one that you mentioned, which is the triangular one. That is more of a infographic, if you call it that, that shows who is supposed to be, who yields to who in terms of park user. So the individual park supervisors and teams will be able to select based on their knowledge of their own park users or potential challenges that they already know about, that they can add more signage to specific trails or specific parts of a trail. They can select, a different imagery that goes perhaps more relating to their park users. Maybe equestrians don't work in certain parks, but equestrian images do work in other parks. So we're prepared to provide a suite that the individual park supervisors who we know their users best can use. We will work with them to evaluate if user conflicts go down, and we'll make tweaks as necessary from imagery and or messages, at a later date as we continue to analyze and evolve the discussion, and hopefully people will take this very seriously.
Also on the question of photos, like you're saying, certain areas are going to have a single photo for a particular. I was just thinking of the Serpentine Prairie, and it's like every user group uses that. So which one is going to, which user group are you going to be depicted on the photo?
Well, Carol, can I, I'll touch on this one.
Go ahead, Dave, sure.
It's just a little circle board recommended from all the research and their experience that we have to shorten the text a little on the signage too. So part of the suite would be is that we would do a suite and have a picture of a biker, and then the message on that sign would be towards bikers, because we know that people, when they looked at the sign, they were drawn to the sign that looked like them. So if we want to talk to bikers, we need to put a picture of a biker on it. And so we might have some signs that will be kind of multi-use, but really to be able to improve behavior, we would need to kind of narrow it down. And so we were trying to talk to hikers or dog walker, people walking dogs. We would want a picture of that, and the message would be kind of short and concise about that subject. Same with equestrians, if we were trying to talk to them. So that was based on the recommendations, what I would say, knowing that there's multiple uses, but we're really trying to usually go after whatever the behavior we're trying to improve is.
Okay, that makes sense. And then other things. Oh, I know what it was. As far as outreach, we used to we used to have workshops. And when I was a park supervisor, we had workshops that came out of actually public safety and our equestrian unit to educate dog owners around behavior around horses. And I was wondering if that could be something that would be useful, and could it be restarted? I mean, especially with what we have, and then the behaviors that we're hearing from Briones, especially with mountain bikes and horses. And then, of course, in Serpentine, it's always been dogs and horses. So is that something that we could possibly restart, or you have any interest in doing?
Hello, Director, Chief Tabrero again. I can certainly ask. I will ask my staff, and I will ask Heather Gilfillan, our VTSP coordinator, where are they in terms of those type of outreach efforts and what their capacity is. And we're always willing to help, and it certainly merits a conversation.
Okay, great.
And Director Rosario, I'll mention that I think the program you're talking about was once upon a time called Pups and Ponies.
Yes.
And we have certainly over the years, COVID has obviously slowed that, if not stopped that. But one thing I failed to mention, and Tony just did, so I appreciate that we plan to be having assistance with the VTSP. So whether it's through programs of the sort that you were mentioning, the Pups and Ponies, and in some sort of a special event that could be held on a Saturday morning for an hour or something like that, versus the individual VTSP members who are doing their regular hikes to be prepared with the same kind of information that we're talking about today in terms of the various messages.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that we could you could have a few or a couple of workshops and film them and put them on YouTube as informational or educational videos.
Yeah,
that would work too.
Age, that's probably a very smart move on our part to do that.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. And
we
then,
did. Oh, I'm sorry, Director. We did go, as AGM Johnson said, I believe. Thank you for reminding me, Carol. We did. I think it was at Point Isabel that the Pups and Pony event. I think you worked with Captain Love on that to and they brought the mounted unit out and did engagement, and of course had social media and everything broadcasting that. So thank you for remembering that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's perfect. And then at some point we need to, in our definition, we need to hammer down or lock down a definition of our trails, single track, fire road, etc. We probably need to, so that we can properly educate not only ourselves, but the public as well, to have a standardized trail name or identifier so that everyone can be on the same track. And then is there going to be anything on illegal trail building?
I think I'm going to refer that question to Jim and Tony, and maybe even Brian Holt as it relates to future discussions about with the Trails Committee that he's been working with.
Yeah, Jim O'Connor, Assistant General Manager of Operations. So Director Rosario, I answered your question. You know the scope of this problem we have district-wide. It's huge. We did a mapping of the what we call the bootleg trails, the illegal trails in Briones back in 2015. And at that time, we logged 18 miles of illegal trails. We are looking at doing some targeted work at Briones on multiple fronts. Staff that are in our trails group out of ASD and some of the planning staff have already been working with operations and public safety. We've been kind of reviewing those bootleg trails and with a strategy at looking at can some of them be adopted into the trail system since they've been there so long and they've been so long established, and then looking at restoring or mitigating the other trails that are illegal. But that's a huge effort. And I can tell you that we've been working in operations with public safety for probably the last 5 years on an effort to deal with at least one trail, the famous bootleg in Briones called Hank and Frank. And we've been working, and in fact, I was just talking to one of the officers the other day when Director Coffey and I were out there, and it's an endless cycle of park staff putting up barriers, trying to do some restoration, and then the biking community unfortunately coming back in and removing those barriers and reusing the trails. So I think that overall that's going to be a long-term process that we're going to have to get into, but I think at least in an internal staff, we're looking at that concept and coming up with ideas about how to manage that and potentially mitigate that into the future. But it's going to take the effort again. It's kind of like the presentation today. That's not something we can do alone. That's going to have to be an effort of, and quite frankly, a lot of it has to do with the mountain bike community, and they're going to have to join us in preventing future trails from being built, and then also in some of the restoration work around these existing trails. So I think overall, and I know I saw Brian pop up, but from a trails perspective that I've been in this business a long, long time, is that we also have to look at, are we satisfying a need out there for our user groups? And that's a big problem, that these trails get developed because we're not satisfying that user experience. So that's part of the bigger picture looking at trails in regional parks. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but we're getting a start on thinking about how to manage that, but it's a huge effort, and hopefully we can engage the user groups in helping us with that.
I was going to just respond to two things. One, Director Rosario, you mentioned the need to sort of get into sort of defining our trails and our roads. Completely agree, and we've started on a trails inventory and trying to work through with our GIS department, where we're coming up with a sort of consistent classification between, EVMA and maintenance roads and fire roads versus single track or dual track types of trails. So we're beginning to work on that and look at that. And then regarding the illegal trail building and bootleg trails, one of the things that we have also heard consistently from the mountain bike community and others is, and that we have seen is just building the sort of facilities that people want to use end up taking away the impetus to build those types of illegally build those same types of things. So the mountain bike community has come to us many times and just sort of said, where can we work with you to develop these types of facilities? And we haven't necessarily had that opportunity to date, except for, I would say, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about how Crockett Hills came to be. But one data point that I find that's interesting is that if we look at some of our parks like Del Val or Briones, where there hasn't been such a sort of mountain bike focused trail effort, is we do see a lot of illegal trail building. Since the trails, the mountain bike focused trails have been built at Crockett Hills, we don't see that same occurrence in that facility. So one instance, and it's a bit anecdotal, but that is what we have heard consistently, is if you provide the facilities for the cyclists that they wish to use, the chances of them sort of building their own becomes much more diminished. And what we've heard from the cycling organizations is, rather than putting their effort towards building illegal trails, they would like to volunteer and help to maintain the legal trails that they do have. So that's something consistently that we've heard in the trail user group.
Well, that really is a much larger concept. I mean, do we have the response? Should we be responsible for providing every use, every recreational use that people would like? Because one of the things that our younger mountain bike advocates drop, which they probably shouldn't, is, we're racing and you don't give us enough locations in your parks so we can practice our racing. And I don't know if they realize how we're reacting to that, but because they want a place to race their mountain bikes, are we responsible for providing that? And that's a question that Jim O'Connor loves to deal with, right? Jim?
Thank you, Jim O'Connor again. Just one response, Director Lane, is that I think that my son was on a mountain bike team in the San Ramon Valley, and when they practice, they're not racing like they do on the race days. They're just simply it's a workout focus. So I'll just put that out there. They're looking at places to practice, steep trails, things like that, where they can get out there. And they used to go single file, and they're pretty good about it, because I've been out there with them. The other thing I want to respond to is the concept of, I think none of us would agree that we have to accommodate every use in every park. That's just not feasible. Some parks are just too environmentally sensitive. Some are just the soil types and the vegetative cover does not allow for that. So I don't think that we're all expecting, to accommodate every use in every park. That's just, that would be an unreasonable expectation of anybody in the trails community. But certainly looking at the larger, we are a regional trail system, 2 counties. We have the opportunity to meet these needs in several of our parks. Even if we just talk about the one use, the mountain biking, I think we can meet some of those needs, but not in every park. And the idea of, the staff, we're working on that idea of alternating trail days, when bikes can go on and off. And Brian, I think, mentioned the word predictability, which is what people want. Do I know I can go on this trail on this day and the potential of coming across a mountain bike is low? And we can't guarantee it is 0, but can it be lowered so that I feel safe? And it goes really back to Director Lane, what you said about older folks. And I'll put myself in that category. I'm getting at a point where I can't just jump off the edge of a trail to get out of the way. And so, I put myself in that same category. So we have to look at this from a holistic standpoint. And, but certainly, I can tell you the mountain bike community, when we first built Crockett, they're ecstatic. They think that's just wonderful. And I've ridden the trails too on a mountain bike. They're really well built. They're really well designed. They're enjoyable. And I know that there's been an advocacy through several of the board members about Wildcat Canyon. I know there's some thought about going into looking at that as a potential flow trail, as they like to call it. But you know, that's one option. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Certainly. Follow up, Bev?
Well, yeah, so I do have several things. One is, I love that sign that you showed with all the bells. I thought that was a very, that's a sign that people would really notice. But are we actually having them borrow bells? Aren't we giving them bells? I mean,
Yes,
they're
they,
supposed to return the bells?
well, we expect that people
I know there's
probably
alliteration,
won't.
but yeah, and it's
yes.
a cool bell.
Oh,
Yeah.
It is a cool bell. It was selected actually by the bike folks. Jim has one that he's got showing right now. And those bike, we call them the bell kiosks, are being created again by our environmental graphics team and will be placed. I think some of them are already placed in some very specific locations. Sibley, for example, and I think Briones are the 2 locations right now we're going to test them at. And the bike council are going to be the ones to replenish them. So again, we're trying to engage the advocates of their interest, of their sport, to be our partner.
Well, I just think that's fabulous. But if you're not wanting them to return, then you shouldn't use the word borrow.
Well,
Really, I mean it. It's very deceptive. And again, I love the sign. So, when you have these key takeaways and talk about limited text and high quality photos, I mean, that's who we are. We always have done that. Is this a new concept? Does that mean different things than what we've done in the past to say limited text and high quality photos?
Well, no, I'll just say that when they were testing, we had a concept that was, the Trails 101, which was an idea of, making it so that the information, kind of a lot of information to give folks about a 101 on trail use. And so it would have a lot of information for folks, because our panels do that. They have a lot of more information because people walk over and they're in the mood to read. So that was one approach, was trail use 101. People might come over and look at the sign and actually get into like the detailed info, but the feedback was that no, they do like what we kind of do, which is the limited text and photos to grab folks' attention. So it kind of came back to that we are going with what we typically do, and that we don't want to, the 101 information, detailed information just wasn't going to be effective really when it came down to it.
Yes.
perhaps Jonathan Hobbs, who
Obviously.
is our resident signage expert, might want to weigh in and acknowledge, because I do see him here. He's been chomping at the bit, I think, to get in. Jonathan, tell us what really works in signage.
So if Jonathan's going to speak, I also have this, we have a constant thing in the Park District. Who's writing what? So the naturalists get instructions that they can't write something that's longer than 125 words for a whole park, something like that. And there's definitely skills to write something briefly. And so the plan here that you are bringing to us is not involving naturalists. So who is doing the writing?
Well, if I can say.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, so here you are.
Jonathan Hobbs, Creative Design Manager here. Yes, short messages and high quality photos. And occasionally it's good to go out and research this all again and make sure that we're on the right track. And although it may not seem like earth-shattering news, there is kind of a tendency to load up all of these projects with as much information as you can put on them. But there's a kind of a point of declining returns where people just don't read a lot of information. So it's good to kind of use this kind of effort to refine that and to make sure that we're on the right track with those kinds of things. And as in terms of who's coming up with the messages, Circle Point is definitely reaching out and polling and kind of doing the real work on the messaging. And then through Dave's doing a fabulous job of kind of refining the messages. These aren't really interpretive messages in this case. So we're not making interpretive signs here. We're conveying a message. So the whole goal of this is to convey the message as quickly as possible to as many people as possible, as it always is with environmental graphics. So yes, but you're definitely right. Shorter messages, great photos are always the way to go. And it's good to have it kind of reinforced by this outside company.
Let me just add also, last year, I believe, we actually started our dog message campaign, excuse me, if you recall. And we sent pictures of people with dogs on leashes, mostly, I believe, with short messages about what we expected people to do. Pick up your waste, keep your dog on a leash when it's appropriate, that kind of thing. And I personally have gotten more feedback from people that they have seen that the imagery and the short messaging really resonated. They stopped for, maybe a millisecond, but it's different than our traditional brown signs that are, informative about ingress and egress, directional. The message for the dog sign was supposed to be, this is really, this is you, the dog owner. This is what we want you to remember to do. So taking that thought and moving it to what we're talking about today, trail use, very similar. So the message is going to be about trails are for everyone. It's not just for you, the dog walker or the bike rider or the equestrian. Trails are for everybody. And we really want people to start realizing and taking personal accountability in the way that they use our trails for whatever use that they use. So if that helps at all, that is part of how we've developed the messaging.
Good. Well, I guess then the last thing I would say is that, we need to be addressing our land banks too. It's the Wild West on our land banks. People are going over fences. They're doing anything. And some of these properties have not been open for, northern part of Las Trampas for well over a decade. And we have opportunities to help a variety of our trail users in those. And we have just got to recognize that there are projects that we could be doing in our existing land and in land banks that need to be open that can meet a lot of these people's needs. And we are so overdue in addressing opening these land bank properties, and people are going in and doing whatever they would like. And sometimes they call a park supervisor and talk about a tree being down over such and such a trail. And he or she has to tell them, well, that's a land bank and people are not supposed to be in there. But we don't have enough people to enforce keeping people out and keeping them safe in land banks. And we just can't wander around with 30% of our land or more closed to the public. It's bad. That doesn't relate to anything here probably, but it's an issue.
Any response from management?
A quick response from me, Director Lane, Christina Kelchner, AGM of ASD. I would say I would agree with you that we do have a lot of land bank properties that we need to be moving forward. And I think it does relate to this conversation because the disagreements from the community about how to open those properties and how to build trails, and who gets to use those trails has been a pretty significant barrier to moving forward on our planning for opening those parks. And if you remember in 2018 or 19, when we had the workshop that was focused on trails, that really came out of a lot of community interest in building new trails in some of our land bank property. So that's sort of what generated this new focus on trails, and is a lot of why we're trying to work this out, and so that we can move forward on opening our land bank properties. But we agree with you, and we're working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's go back to I agree with Beverly, but also see there's also a benefit for leaving the land banks unused. Environmentally, it's probably a good thing, but we do need to give our public some access. But going back to illegal trails, what happens if we catch someone or a group of people building in an illegal trail? What happens? And what are the consequences?
That's good afternoon, Director. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I had my microphone off. That's a violation of Ordinance 38, and we'll issue them a citation.
And what is that citation?
Well, the citation would be for a specific subsection, building illegal trails or damaging the parks. I'd have to look that up to give you the specific section. And then from there, it would go to the court system regarding a potential fine. I'm not aware of anything else there in terms of you may be thinking of restorative justice. That could be something there. I could certainly make an inquiry about that. In other words, do they come back and repair things and that's certainly a question I could delve into that.
Yeah, well, I think that should be a part of it for sure. And then do we know what the fine is?
I do not know what the fine is.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe a good sized fine along with restorative justice would be something we should pursue, I think. And then I think that's it. I think overall, I think it's a great presentation. I think we are definitely headed in the right direction, and I appreciate the effort. My only critique of the survey is that it was all done in Contra Costa County. the infield ones, Crockett and Alhambra staging area. Would have been, I don't know if we would gotten any other different responses if you did one at Lake Chabot or Redwood or another Alameda County park.
We did Inspiration Point, but that's still Contra Costa.
That's Contra Costa.
Technically, yeah. Well, we did.
Redwood.
Yes, we had a lot. We have a list of places we would love to get to, and we still hope to get to over time. That balanced out both geography, but also major use. The two spots we picked so far were targeted at multi-use areas, so at least they had a mixture of uses. We definitely know we want to go more to get some equestrian use too. But those uses that we did have, there are equestrians at Briones where we did some of this. So there's some, but we know we can definitely balance out the use and geography of the surveying folks. So it wasn't meant to, it's not meant to be like, oh, this is everything. This is what we got so far with two locations we were able to get to. And so there is a lot more work to be done. But it's nice to hear, and feedback we got is that they were beneficial in terms of both getting information, but also engaging the public. So it's something that kind of we were thinking about doing ongoing, as a way to engage and get information, but, talk to folks. But we have to have a program for doing that beyond just our ambassadors, but we know next phase we can reach out and we'll start working with public safety and their volunteers. So that is a option we have on our list.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well done. And we're definitely going to need the education and some of the information from the surveys, because we do have to make a determination, especially with McCosker and the trail and the proposed trails there. So very timely. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well. Mila and I really enjoyed doing the survey out at Briones. And what we found is that it was much more effective just to start a conversation with the people as they pass by, rather than ask them to come over and fill it out themselves, that we would hold it and start talking to them along the lines of the questioning and fill it out for them, in effect. And we were able to do that. We actually talked to a lot more than 50 people, probably closer to 100, but we're only able to get surveys, solid surveys from about 50 people, but it was, I really enjoyed it. Carol, my impression has been that the Poop Fairy campaign has worked to some degree. I mean, I see less of the bags than I used to, but anecdotally, is that what we hear from rangers, that it's better because of that campaign?
You know, this is about the time that we will be evaluating. So I'd actually like to ask Jim if he has any insight to any reduction of dog waste being left on the trails.
I don't. I've not asked the question of my staff, but that's a good one. And if we're going to do evaluation, that'd be great. I'm sure my staff would give you plenty of feedback on that. I'm still picking up bags myself, so I haven't seen it go to zero. No, you still see them, but my impression has been not as much. It might just be the season as well. Although, you know, there's lots of people out these past few weekends in our park, so I don't see the winter slacking off any, at least as long as the COVID is still present. Jim, that bell, do you press a button on that bell to make it ring, or is it just? No, it's like a little mini cowbell. So you put it on your bike somewhere or on your handlebars, and just the motion of your bike makes it ring.
So it's like the little bell on my cat's collar.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Okay. I'm wondering if will they use that. I've seen giveaways of the bells that you actually press the button to make them work. And,
yeah, prior to COVID, the two regional trail groups, especially Eric Stormer's group, were doing information sessions, and they were actually doing helmet giveaways and bike bell giveaways, and it was a really nice effort. You know, unfortunately, hopefully we'll get back to that soon, but that was a really well received effort to give bells out and help with the whole safety issue on the regional trails.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a big fan of finding out for any given issue in terms of operating a park or messages that you want to get out to your users, that it's very helpful to see what other parks are doing and have done. There's so many out there and so many jurisdictions that operate parks. And I know, you know, the National Park and Rec Association's message board, where people post their questions, there's often discussions about how are you handling bicycles there. And I tend to clip those and save them and put them off in a file that I have on the bicycle issue. Trails for everyone. I don't mean this to be critical. I like it.
Please be. That's what we.
Well, I'm waiting for the letter we're gonna get that talks about how our bike enthusiasts in management are suggesting that trails are really going to be now for all the bikes. And I'm just sure we're going to get that note from some of our friends. And I'm wondering if to some extent it could be construed as misleading because we don't allow bicycles on narrow dirt trails generally. You know, e-bikes aren't allowed in parks at all currently. Of course they are, you know, so we do have some restrictive policies, and it's not that it's purposely restrictive, but effectively, if we do create more flow trails, and I'm a supporter of that. I like the idea of presented about Wildcat if the land isn't sensitive habitat for fauna or for flora. Crockett Hills, it works, but the trade-off is hikers really don't use those trails. You know, they're labeled multi-use, but I know I never go near them because they're They're just designed for bikes. They're flow trails. And and to the extent we're considering alternate days, maybe as an experiment or something out there. So there are going to be some days when trails aren't for everyone, if there's something like that. So that's what concerns me about that message, is that it may be over-inclusive. Of course, you know, if those kind of concerns overly inhibit what you want to do, then, you know, they're just concerns. So I just wondered if there had been some thought given to that.
Well, thank you, President Coffey. And it's good to hear that feedback. Certainly, right now, we're trying to be inclusive. We're trying to share the message that etiquette crosses all boundaries for users. And then we're going to leave it up to the park supervisors as to what images or what signage they put up in their various locations. So we're going to let them dictate that. And as things may change, if the board decides to provide some additional direct bike access only types of trails, we'll have to revisit some of this messaging. But our whole premise from the get-go was to try to encourage the general population who is either a walker, a hiker, a dog walker, an equestrian, or a biker, regardless of who they are, to be cognizant that they're not the only ones on the trail, that there's others in this wonderful system of ours that are also with them. We're trying not to be exclusive, but more inclusive. But also, this is a living program. So it's not just a static one time fits all, we're gonna walk away from it. So if it turns out things are not working, that it's not as helpful as we had hoped, or if the conflicts are not lessening, then we'll have to come back to the information and identify, is it trails are for everyone, or is it something else?
Well, you know, Colin, I would agree with you if they had said all trails are for everyone, you know, but that's not what they have.
Right.
And so they're trying to reach that concept. And, you know, we have run into it as well with the master plan thing about we want to do trails for all users, you know, then people say, oh, and then all trails should be blah, blah. But I think by not putting all there, that's a lot of protection.
Thank you, Director Lane.
And we want to presume that people will take what we say reasonably, within reason, right? We're not opening trails to motor vehicles, right? You know, it's within the scope of what we do. Trails are for everyone. I wanted just to suggest on the issue of signage. It has been my impression that the bicycle conflicts with equestrians or hikers occur most often at the confluence of trails. So certainly trailheads, but also where trails intersect, or there's several trails that come together, and it usually has to do with speed, bike speeding. And I think if there was some way to place signs, the kind of signs you're talking about that deliver a message instead of a lot of text, that is just, the message is, you know, slow down here. You're coming into an area where there's a lot of people coming right together. You think of, we've been talking about Alhambra Creek Trail and the Alhambra staging area, and you know, that down as you get closer to the parking lot, there are more and more trails that come together. There's 3 or 4 from all different directions. And if there were some signs out there and at other high volume locations like that, that just caught people's attention, slow down, that would get a lot of the, there's still people obviously who ignore signs, but it might help. It's occurred to me. And of course, your rangers would know where those locations are. It's just a thought. The issue of that Dee brought up, Chief Giroux, of the logging of incidents and such. I'm thinking and hoping there is one for dog bites or aggressive dogs, and we occasionally see them in the monthly reports, but there ought to be somebody adding those up so that we monitor that at the board level and know how much of that. Anecdotally, I hear about it, but you know, there's a trade-off to the dogs off leash policy, and that is that occasionally happens. I've known in 5 years, I've heard of 3 or 4 of them, and that's not a lot, and it doesn't make me think of that banning that practice, making people put dogs on leash. It's terribly, shouldn't use the word terribly, it's very, there's a very positive feeling for our parks by dog owners because of that. So it's very popular. But I would suggest, I think John Sutter did at one point, that there be an annual tracking of aggressive dog incidents so that we can at least have a feel for that. However that can be. I think, oh, one more note I have, and then I'll quit because it's 3. I wanted to get us out by 3. The other issue about the conflict, my impression is the vast majority of bicyclists are exercise proper etiquette and ring the bells or say coming on your left, or you know, the majority of bikers do know this. And my impression, again, from being out in parks over the last 5 or 6 years, is that's getting better. That what the biking community is doing to communicate to bikers the need for proper etiquette and following the rules has helped. And I've been told this by other hikers, and some of the equestrians have said, yeah, you know, it's gotten a little better. So I tell our friends at the Bicycle Council that I think it's working and keep it up. It's one thing. Now, the majority of the conflicts that I hear of involve kids who are less attentive to the rules and etiquette than adults. There's some adults out there, but I mean, that do it too. But we're getting more kids riding bikes in the parks, and they don't know to stay away from horses. You know, I had equestrians telling me the kids just barrel down right between the horses, a couple of horses, and they don't know that they can't do that. And other rules and speeding rules and such. So my point is to suggest that somehow in this messaging campaign, you figure out how to reach the 10 to 16-year-old group, you know, the kids that are now bicycling out there. And I don't know what the best vehicle for that is, but keep that in mind, that an important segment of the audience that we want to act better are young kids on bikes. So how do you reach them? That's my impression. So I'm done.
Thank you, President Coffey. Let me just respond really quickly to that. We hear you, and certainly our plan here is not a one-size-fits-all, as I've said. So there will be a variety of signage, and Jonathan Hobbs also is preparing the kind of signage that you and other directors were talking about in terms of slowing down and things of that sort. We just didn't show that today. That's more on the trails themselves, informational as opposed to visual with, you know, trying to show people what they should be doing. It's more, I guess, word messaging. And from what I hear from all of the, and I'm not saying it's exclusive, but a lot of the mountain bike groups that are youngsters, particularly those in the high schools, I'm hearing that them coming to our board meetings and actually speaking a lot more poised in terms of knowing the rules and adhering to them than some of the other folks that I have heard in the past. Not to say that all youngsters will do that, but I suspect that many of them are being taught by leaders
Coaches.
who are respectful. So it's not a one size fits all. We will
Yeah,
continue
no,
to
but those
work with everybody.
those kids that come to our meeting are great, and they're there supporting their coach who says, you know, my team needs access to more challenging trails than the fire roads. And yeah, okay, but then and so those are kids who understand.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I don't know how you get to the rest of them that aren't coached. Christina?
Quick response to that, Director Coffey. As you say, the mountain, and as Carol noted, the mountain bike teams have extensive programs for etiquette and actually have to sign a pledge or they can't participate in the team of complying with that etiquette. And I would also just mention that the overall NorCal League and some of the individual teams have offered to work with us so that they provide training classes to people who are not on their teams, but just to the larger community. And they could do that in our park. So there may be some opportunities there to rely on their expertise in working with kids and teaching them trail etiquette. That's something we could look into to get that message out.
So some high schools have school newspapers you can buy ads in, you know. I don't know. I just know it's an important segment of what we need to address. Can we move on toward closing out the meeting? Directors?
Okay.
Now, we need to ask if there is any public comment or I don't see members of the public here, but Becky, do we have any?
Director Coffey, we have no public comments and I have not received any written comments.
All right, so the last item on the agenda, we've had committee comments, is general manager comments. Does the general manager have any comments?
I do not.
Good. I don't really mean that. But that means we can adjourn the meeting, and seeing no opposition. Thank you all. Thank you for all your time and effort put into the presentations and your time today. Thank you.
Also, if I can just a sec, I just want to thank everybody for my picture that I got from the as president of the board. It's really wonderful. All the events that we shared together. It was really very touching. I really love it. So thank you all for all of you that participated in that. So
Christina, I'll get on my call with you in a few minutes.
Okay. Good. Thank you.